just for you to know, I worked for the last nearly 20 years on women's rights, and as I was saying earlier, with was working on changing the law as distinct from changing the law in relation to women. And just in terms of the Irish context, I suppose this year we're celebrating 100 years of our Dáil, and the first Dáil, which is our first parliament. And in that first parliament, we had after we got independence, we had the Declaration of Independence had in its constitution, well, I don't know if you called it the constitution, but the Declaration of 1916 was that all men and women should be treated equally. But when the Dáil was enacted and its constitution and the Irish Free State in 1922, I'm afraid things changed quite considerably. And the Irish state, sadly, a woman in our constitution in Article 41(2)(1), and I'll just read it. It says, in particular, the state recognises that by her life within the home, woman gives to the state without which the common good cannot be achieved. And 2.2, the state shall therefore endeavour to ensure that mothers shall not be obliged by economic necessity to engage in labour to the neglect of their duties in the home. And that particular article in the Constitution, we had a Citizens' Assembly recently to look at taking that article out and replacing it. And I think there are recommendations that are there which are really worth looking at, and they will be looked at, and we will have a referendum in the not too distant future on changing that article in our constitution. Now, the women achieved the vote in 1918, but that didn't mean a society that espoused equality. And successive Irish governments introduced repressive legislation, and in the 1920s, the 30s, including the effective removal of women from juries in 1927, the Marriage Bar in 1932, the Conditions of Employment Act in 1935, which restricted women's employment in certain areas, and of course, the privileging of women in the home in the 1937 Constitution. Groups like the Irish Housewives Association and the Irish Women's Workers Union valiantly fought these attempts to restrict women to the domestic sphere. But it wasn't until the 1960s and the 1970s that reformists and activists combined to achieve some extraordinary changes. And for example, in 1986, a woman obviously was seen as by Irish law as a shackle of her husband, and so a married woman. So in 1986, only then the law was changed, where a woman could create her own domicility. Up to then, no matter where a woman's husband was living, if he was physically in South Africa and she was in Ireland, she was deemed to be living in South Africa. So that law didn't change until 1986. And in 1990, the law changed on rape within marriage. Up to then, and since then, there've only been 3 cases since 1990. Well, the law was enacted in 1991. You know, we have a long way to go, but I think things like the marriage referendum and the repeal the 8th referendum, there is hope. And but we still have a long way to go in terms of things like equal pay and women in leadership on boards, on company boards, etc., etc. So I think we I say the fight is still to be fought here. Is that what you wanted, Sandy?
Yeah.
There is a very, sorry, just before I finish, Brehon law was the Irish was the laws that governed Ireland before we were colonized. And Elizabeth I, they considered the Brehon laws to be old and unreasonable, and common law came into Ireland in the 17th century. And there's a wonderful book called The Lost Laws, and it's by a woman called Catherine Duggan, and it's about she has translated a lot of the old texts on the Brehon laws, so it's really interesting to have a look at that. The Brehon laws were interesting. Just a few of them. I read one out where a husband who through listlessness does not go to his wife's bed, then he must pay a fine. And on February the 1st, nota bene, Sandy, it's the day when a husband and wife may decide to walk away from the marriage. If a man takes a woman off a horse into the woods or onto a sea-going ship, and if members of the woman's tribe are present, they must object within 24 hours, or they may not demand a payment of the fine. And then the husband-to-be shall pay a bride price of land, cattle, horses, gold, or silver to the father of the bride, and the husband and wife retain individual rights to all land, flocks, and household goods that they brought to the marriage. If a woman makes an assignment with a man to come to her in a bed or behind a bush, the man is not considered guilty, even if she screams. But if she has not agreed to a meeting, however, he is guilty as soon as she screams. So these are some of the translations from the old text, but they're very interesting. That's it. Thank you.
Great. No, what I always think about these myths is they highlight or they clarify an issue. The one thing about which the fish knows nothing is water. And the water, at least the legal water in which we are swimming around, gets highlighted by something so different as what we've got in the Partholonian story. So the very difference makes you reflect on what we have. And then bringing Ellen in, you kind of think, well, Ireland got its independence. Why didn't it go back to some of the old Brehon laws, or the laws that are inherent in the myth, rather than go the direction it did with those very repressive laws led by Charles McQuaid and others.
Well, it was common law, Sandy. That was common law.
Common law, yeah.
Which is not all, by the way, which is not all bad.
Yeah. Okay. What you didn't talk about is all the work you've done on the legal system in practice, all that wonderful work changing attitudes around women who had the experience of seeking justice after sexual abuse or rape.
Well, I think, I think one of the big ones, achievements we had, and it wasn't just me, obviously, it was women working together, was that we got a definition of consent into the sexual offences legislation in 2017, and also a crime of coercive control in the 2018 legislation.
Yeah, no, I think you've been part of some fantastic work. Anyway, look into small groups again, because what we're looking at is the legal systems based on foundational cultural or mythic assumptions. And I think we've had an opportunity today perhaps to reflect on what those are. So into small groups again, and we'll spend about 10 minutes chatting about that in the small groups. Okay. And thanks very much, Ellen.